Saturday.
Hey, good evening. We're going to start. So, for those of you who don't know me, I'm Rabbi Foxman. I'm the assistant rabbi here at Beth Jacob. I'm a great fan of Lucy, Regine, and Suzy's. And when I had originally approached them about this idea, about telling their story, telling their tale, tonight, which is the 10th of Teves, which I'll mention in just a moment. So it took a little bit of convincing. And one of the points of hesitancy was, well, no one's going to come. If this is nobody, I can't wait till somebody comes. So yes, and there are several reasons for that. But first, a note about tonight. Tonight is the 10th of Teves, the 10th day of the Jewish month of Teves. And it's a very significant day. Many of you know that tomorrow morning is a traditional Jewish fast day. It's a day of mourning, a day of remembrance. It's a day in which we commemorate Jewish tragedies, 3 tragedies that took place in the course of Jewish history. Significant tragedies. The first and foremost, the one that we commemorate is the loss of the temple. So it's a day of loss, a day of mourning, and a day of remembrance. It's also interesting that at the same time as this is a day of mourning, in more recent history, much more recent history, the chief rabbinate of Israel declared that the 10th day of Teves is known as the Yom HaKadish HaKlali. That is the general Kaddish day. Kaddish, as we all know, is a prayer, a very moving piece of liturgy that is recited in the mourning period on the Yurtzeit, the day of remembering a loved one's passing. And unfortunately, a great many Holocaust survivors had family members whose Yurtzeit they didn't know and they couldn't know because of the lost records. And they couldn't know what day to say Kaddish. And therefore, tonight and tomorrow, was designated as the day of Kaddish for all those who lost family members in the Holocaust and don't know the Yurtzeit. So on one hand, it's a day of great loss, and on the other hand, it's a day of remembrance. And I just want to note something about Kaddish. Kaddish, which is a universally recognized Jewish prayer of mourning, but if you look at the prayer itself, and you translate the words, there's not a stitch, there's not a message, there's not a hint of mourning about that prayer. Iskadal v'yiskadash shemei Rava, which is the beginning of the prayer, is about God's name being elevated and exalted. Isn't that strange? Isn't it a strange thing that the prayer most associated with mourning and loss is all about God's name being exalted? So I think one of the messages you'll get tonight, among many others, is that yes, it is strange, but no, it's also not strange at all, because behind everything we recognize God's guiding hand. And even in the darkest of times, and even in the most worrisome of times, we know that God is behind it all, and that God is guiding things for the best. Now, far be it for me, or really anybody, to speak about the Holocaust. My personal opinion is the only people who can speak about the Holocaust are those who went through it. And so nothing that I'm saying here is directly, I don't mean making a direct comment about the Holocaust. I can't say that we see God's guiding hand. It was something that is unimaginable in its magnitude. And therefore it is a real blessing to have with us our 3 presenters tonight, longtime members of the community, builders of the community, and they're going to share with us their personal tale of remembrance. And therefore I want to offer a public and personal thank you to Lucy, to Regina, and to Suzy for taking the time for the next hour or so to deliver this message and to share their journey. And I hope it will be one that is both of interest and intrigue, and one that is, at least in a subtle way, very uplifting to all of us. So this should be a source of blessing. It is a blessing to have you in the community. I want to close with one idea, and that is there's a tale told of somebody who once came. This is told many times over in different contexts. Somebody approached the famed Satmar Rebbe, Rabbi Teitelbaum, was a giant Torah scholar after the war. And they used to come and ask him for a blessing. To receive a blessing, a bracha, a blessing from the great tzaddik, from the great sage. And And he would often tell them, if there were Holocaust survivors around, he would say, don't ask for a blessing just from me, but make sure that when you find a survivor, ask for a blessing from them, because they are a true blessing. To have gone through such an experience and to come out with strength and vibrance as these three have, they are a true blessing for our entire community. So thank you very much for coming, and thank you to the three of you for your presentation.
Can we raise the sound a little before we start? Sounds a little what?
Thank you, Rabbi.
Well, welcome to all of you. You have to, I have to talk to you better.
Hey, Junior, we can't see her.
Thank you for all of you for having come here this evening. What a pleasure it is to see many of you, including our family, our friends, and even my wonderful neighbors out here. Thank you. Suzy, Regine, and I also want to take the opportunity to thank Helene Grossman. She is Suzy's daughter, and she was helped us in preparing this presentation. Her help was invaluable. Thank you, Helene. She's there. We have been members, active members, very active members of this congregation for over 65 years. And as a matter of fact, my father-in-law, Joe Carson, was one of the original 10 men that started the shul on Boulevard. That was a long time ago, in the early 40s. We have been part of this community all the way from the little white house on Boulevard to here, La Vista Road. A lot of you know us, but not a lot of people know about our history and how we actually came to the United States and ultimately here in Atlanta, Georgia. Rabbi Faxbrunner approached us and thought it would be appropriate to share our journey with you. For those who don't know us, Regina and Suzy are sisters. I'm related to them because our grandfathers were brothers, so we are cousins. So this story is not just my story or my family's story, but there are elements in here for everyone. As you listen, you might hear a story of miracles, how 7 children survived without their parents under very difficult circumstances. You might hear a story of love, how 70 years later, these 7 children traveled back to the place where it all began with 44 family members, including their children, grandchildren, to teach and help them understand the reality of this experience. And you may hear a story about the generosity of strangers who risked their lives during this terrible period of human history. Again, thank you for coming. First, some background about our family. So, and tell you what happened to us 70 years ago as our journey began out of Antwerp, Belgium. This family tree are the individuals that got on the train in Antwerp, Belgium on that fateful day in May of 1940. The top Well, is two brothers, David Rosenblit and Hirsch Rosenblit. They had 4 children, and these 4 children had 4 children together. So, and Suzy, Regina, and I are 3 of those children.
8 children in total.
Yeah,
8 children.
8 children. As the title said, it was really happy days. This is one of my favorite pictures of our childhood. We all lived in Antwerp, Belgium, and we were a very close-knit family. So let me introduce you to these wonderful people. On top there is Aunt Sabine, and she's holding that sweet little girl, and that's me. And then below is Aunt Sabine's daughter, Frida, and her son on the other side, and her husband, you can see his nose, I think. And in front is Regina's mother, and that's Regina. And next to her is my mother. And these are my parents, Makla and Belle Rosenblit, and me. It was a custom in our family to rent the beach house and spend the whole summer there. We remember those days with fondness. The women stayed at the beach the whole summer, and the husbands and father would join us on the weekend. And you can see who's there. Regina and Lucy and Suzy. My mother's in the back, on top there. Okay, in May of 1940, our journey began, and Regina will tell you some of that.
So our journey started with a train ride. In May 1940, with the German invasion of Belgium, our family, consisting of 16 members and taking only a few belongings, began the trip from Antwerp, Belgium, to what we hoped would be the safety of France. Remember, we the children were only between the ages of 3 and 9. It took 7 days to arrive at an unknown destination in France. When the train stopped, we were somewhere in France, in a little town where we spent the night in barns. Just a few miles away, the mayor of the village of Vic was requisitioning trucks to transfer some of the refugees to his village. About 150 people arrived from Belgium to the region, and many volunteers were solicited for lodging. In effect, a large number of these refugees left the region within a month. Our family of 16 members were the only ones picked to leave for Vic. Within a month of settling in the village in June 1940, our family was summoned and interned to a French work camp, Clermont-Ferrand. It was apparent that the French government feared that among all the Belgian refugees, German agents were being infiltrated. More than 480 people were detained in this camp. My grandparents were the only ones excluded because of their age. The living conditions were terrible. We slept in stables with floors covered with hay, 10 people to an area. Luckily, within 2 months, all 16 of us were released and could make it back to Vic. This is an example of the camp registration form and release form that each family had to have when they registered at the camp, and then again when being released. The amazing part is that these forms were found when with our family names listed when the research was done in France in 2009. The village of Vic. There were no villas in Vic, no homes with second floors, nor were these homes furnished, or were any furnished homes available. This was just a little country town. There were no paved highways and just one main street where farmers lived in their small homes with no extra rooms. There were no grocery stores, no gas stations, and there were no cars. The pastor of a nearby church appealed to the people of the community, asking for donations of beds, tables, chairs, to furnish 2 vacant houses that could be made available for our family. One of the houses was provided for my grandparents, their daughter, Helly, and her 2 sons, Herbie and Fred, who were 3 and 4 years old at the time. The other house, across the road, was for the rest of our family members, 11 of us in 4 rooms. We really depended on the villagers for all provisions.
This, my sister, this is my sister Betty's birth certificate. Betty was born 3 months after we arrived in Vic in August of 1940. Vic did not have a hospital or any emergency facilities or vehicles, so a farmer who saw my mother walking took her with horse and buggy to a nearby village called Ebreuil, which is where Betty, my sister, was born. Introduce you to my sisters there. During the war, French men were in the army, so the farmers needed extra labor. Therefore, in June of 1941, instructions were given to the mayors of all the cities and towns of the unoccupied zone to transport all Jewish men to help in the farms. The Jewish men were put in work camps called Groupe Travailleurs Étrangers, or foreign workers. Just 1 minute. These are the 4 members of our family, and I'll introduce you to them. As a result, the men of the family were sent to a work camp in Corrèze, where they were put to work on farms. And let me introduce you to these family members. The first one is my father, Bell Rosenfelder. Next comes Ed Sabine's husband, Salomon Rosenfelder, his son, Willie, and Regina's father, and Suzy's father, Ed Stallman. At the same time, the Vichy government ordered all refugee Jews residing in the unoccupied French zones to register for the census. This is an actual copy of the census taken in Vic. It was required for every member of the family to register. This was done after the men of the family had already been taken to work camps. David Rosenblatt, the grandfather, and his wife Cyril were not taken to the camps because of their age. So that is when we had to go into hiding. That is when we really discovered the generosity and courage of the townspeople of Vic, as they hid the women and children of our family. And that's another copy of the census of the rest of the family. The women and children were moved to an abandoned train station called La Gare, which was away from any village and surrounded by farmland and lots of cows. It was farmland, there was no man's land, really. Food was very scarce, so we learned to grow potatoes and a few vegetables. We had a couple of chickens, but nonetheless, we had to depend on the generosity of the farmers to supply us with milk, bread, and basic necessities. Oh, and there was an apple tree on that over there. Can you possibly imagine what a treat those apples were for us? We really appreciated those apples. This is a close-up view of a picture of La Gare, the abandoned train station. It had not been used for several years, so I can assure you it wasn't anything like the Hilton or anything close. This fancy abode did not have plumbing or running water, yet there was a well nearby. As a matter of fact, I'm not even sure we had electricity. In other words, it was primitive living conditions, complete with an outhouse. And looking at the right side of the building, there was one large room downstairs and two small rooms upstairs, which housed the 8 of us women and children. The left side of the building was basically uninhabitable. This abandoned station was really, nobody could find it. It's in no man's land, so to speak. And so it's been basically 2 years now since the family left their home in Belgium. 1 year was spent living with the townspeople in Vic, and the other year was spent à La Gare, the abandoned train station.
Hi everyone, I'm Helene, and they given me a little piece to read. So I'm going to explain something that happened because this was pretty important during this time frame. So Aunt Lucy just said that there's 2 years that they've been living now at La Gare, and they've been living in hiding. In France, there were Paris is, that was occupied by the Nazis, and then there was a free zone below that, okay? So they were in Vichy in the free zone. They called it free, but it really wasn't free, but there was a line in France. So in July of 1942, the city in Aubourg, France, this was the French government, signed an agreement with Germany, and this was really important. I think that's how you pronounce it, Bosquet? He was the Prime Minister of France at the time, and under that agreement, he agreed with the German leaders that the French police would continue to run the free zone, okay? And that the Nazis wouldn't go into the free zone, but in exchange for that, the mayors of the city had to turn over 10,000 Jews. So yes, Nazis weren't going into the free zone, but instead there was like, you know, if I'm not going to do that, then you got to give me some Jews. Now the mayors were really torn about what to do around all this. They had no idea, now what are we going to do? So the easiest thing to do was to go to those work camps and simply take the men that were in the work camps and turn them over to the Nazis. So that's what happened. So you will see that this was the deportation of the 5 men that actually went to Auschwitz. So that agreement was signed on July 16th and 17th, and only a short month later, the men in our family were deported. So only Willie, our cousin, survived the camps and actually returned to Belgium, but he died at a very young age at 28 from typhoid fever, unfortunately. Okay. So the roundup of all Jews continued throughout France, and the French police issued this edict to all the mayors of the cities, and basically what it says, if you're reading all of this, basically what it says is this is to inform you that all Israelites, Germans, Austrians, Poles, Estonians, Russian refugees, and all others who have entered France need to leave if you came here after 1936. The actual notice, as you can see here, this was the expulsion notice, and it says, the first line says, I have the honor of letting you know that the decision of this day is that you have been on notice to leave Vic within 15 days. So our family didn't wait the 15 days. Thank goodness.
So, with orders to evacuate the region within 15 days, where did everyone go? The children, Regina, Lucy, Suzy, Fred, and Herb, were taken by an OSE representative to a children's home in the city of Rouvernay called Le Château des Morels. The three sisters, their mothers, Sally, Hallie, and Sabine's daughter Frida, left for Lyon, plans to hide in a private home where they could find employment as cooks, nannies, or housekeepers. This was all arranged with the supervision and direction of the Jewish underground. My sister Betty was only 1 year old and could not go to the children's home because of her age. So it was arranged that my mother, who was taking the train herself to go into hiding, would get off the train at a pre-arranged station and hand over Betty to an OSE representative who, by the way, was a complete stranger. Betty was taken to a family that would hide and care for her. She lived with this Christian family until the end of the war. Upon returning to the train, my mother was arrested by the Gestapo and sent to Drancy and then deported to Auschwitz, the concentration camp. Our grandparents, David and Cyril, went to a small village in Corrèze where they were hidden until the end of the war. Now I want to talk about this amazing organization called OSE, O-S-E, Œuvre de Secours aux Enfants, and it's translated as the Society for Rescuing Children. It is a Jewish humanitarian organization that saved over 6,000 Jewish refugee children during the war. It was originally founded in Russia in 1912 and then moved to Germany, and then fleeing Nazism, it moved to France. So when the war started, OSE had purchased 14 large chateaus in southern France that they had used for summer camps for these needy children. In 1940, they reorganized themselves into an effective and active underground network. Eventually, we were given new identities. I became Geneviève, Regine became Renee, and Suzy became Suzanne, and continued to move us from occupied France to unoccupied France as the Germans advanced. In other words, the OSE, with the help of the Jewish underground, were responsible for rescuing us and continuing to move us to safer location. How we traveled from one place to another, we don't remember, but we started from Belgium, we went down to Vic, then to Grenoble, then to Lyon, and then back up to near Switzerland. The risk these people took cannot be understated. And this organization is still active today. And if you want to, you can Google it. If you put OSE, you can find out more about this organization. The theory there was that the children had a chance by being separated from the parents because they could already speak French, and with a French name and so forth, they were able to be hidden, whereas the adults needed passports or identity cards with the word Jew on top. And without that card, you couldn't have any rations. So it was almost impossible unless they were hidden. So here we are, the 5 children. And you got Suzy on top, Regina, Lucy, Freddie, and Herbie. And we were taken by the Jose to Bouvernay. So how did these 5 children get to Bouvernay? That's a good question, I'll tell you. Remember, I told you that Jose represented us, brought us here. Well, all we remember is that one day a young man dressed as a Boy Scout came to pick us up and told us we were going camping. That's all we remember. We were all between the ages of 3 and 9. Can you imagine what our mothers were thinking and what we were thinking? To be separated from our family at such a young age, but there was simply no choice. This is a photograph of the Jose Children's Home. It was called the Chateau des Morels in the town of Bouvernay. The Jose house was run by Orthodox rabbis. The chateau housed about 200 refugee children, and most of the children that were there came from Orthodox homes. We spent most of our day learning Hebrew, the prayers, and Judaic studies. But the adjustment was very difficult, as you can imagine. This was our first experience being on our own without our parents. We had been living in the chateau for about a year, and then the unthinkable happened in August of 1943. Half the children, including the 5 of us, were told in the middle of the night to quickly get dressed, collect our few belongings, and leave immediately. We later found out that the remaining children, the staff, teachers, and rabbi who were to leave the following morning were picked up by the Gestapo. We were the lucky ones.
Yes. So what happened to the 5 of us? As mentioned, as soon as the headmaster of the children's home was notified by the mayor's office of Bouvernay that the Germans would be making an inspection at the Chateau des Morels, we were moved during the night to different places for safety. Herbie and Fred returned to Vic to be with their mother and went into hiding. Lucy, Suzy, and I were moved from place to place. These places include other Jose supervised children's homes, as well as stays in a convent in Grenoble, where our names were changed to pretend that we were French Catholic children. We stayed there until we could be placed with private French families, generous and brave enough to keep us safe. Our last location, through Jose, was a children's home in the French Alps. We could see the bright lights of Lausanne, Switzerland, at night, and we wished we could swim across the lake and be safe there. But facing reality, we were in France in winter of 1944, and in what seemed to be the coldest place on earth. I used the thin mattress of the empty bed next to me as a blanket to keep myself warm. Although we were in pitiful shape and frightened little kids with toe infections and boils and lice, we survived thanks to the OSE organization. Luckily, as the war ended, we were, by some miracle, reunited with the rest of the family, refusing to obey orders to bury all papers we had with our mother's address. I mailed a postcard to her, listing ours. The card was forwarded from place to place by the French families where our mother had worked, and eventually found its way to the family where she was hidden. Not long after that, the American liberation started. Our mother, with postcard in hand, hitchhiked in jeeps with American soldiers to the village of Toulon, where we were hidden. I could not believe that she had found us. Seeing her was the best day of my life. In 1945, after being reunited with the rest of the family, and after months of planning and government paperwork to be filled out, the day came that we could travel back to our hometown of Antwerp. All of us were living in the house that our Aunt Sabine, my mother's sister, owned before the war, and we could reclaim. Since we all spoke French, Flemish had to be relearned. Our story confirms how resilient children can be and how easily they can adapt to different circumstances. In 1946, family members began their journey to the United States. First, Lucy and Betty were taken in by an aunt and uncle, and traveled to Atlanta. Next, in 1948, Herbie and Fred and I were sponsored by our Uncle Charles and his wife. In 1950, Aunt Helly and Grandpa made it to Atlanta. And finally, in 1951, my mother, Sally, and my sister, Suzy, arrived just in time for my wedding at Bet Jacob Synagogue. Sabine and her daughter Frida decided to make Aliyah and go to Israel, but they also eventually came back to the States and settled in New York. And so, the 7 children, the 3 sisters, Sabina, Sally, and Haley, and our grandfather, 11 of us in total, started a new life in the United States. English had to be learned quickly, and we did. Even Grandpa, David Rose, who was 80 years old at the time, he lived another 21 years and died at the age of 101. Our mother, Sally Nissenkorn, whom you probably remember, passed away just 5 years ago at the age of 109.
So now we are going fast forward 70 years later. Yeah. So we just finished telling you about what happened to us during 1940 and 1945. Now we are going to fast forward to 2010. Actually, it was in June 2008 when, out of the blue, I received an email addressed to me with the subject matter, Mr. and Mrs. Bell Rosenfelder. Well, that's my mother and father. You bet it caught my attention. Here's the abbreviated part of that email. For 4 years, we have been doing research to make out a list of names of people who were deported from the Allié department. We intend to have a memorial erected with their names carved on it. We got your address and email from the Belgian authorities. Could you please tell me what happened to you? Yours truly, Francois Demargue. Well, you can imagine, I didn't know what to do with this. Was it a joke? Who is this Francois? How did he find me and my address? I was full of questions. Well, I did answer Francois, and just like that, he and I started 2-year email correspondence. And this is how it all started. Let me tell you how did Francois even find us? The document on the left is from the mayor's office in Vic, listing the names of our family. The heading of this piece of paper reads as follows. This is a list of Israelites deported and arrested in the village of Vic, complete with the names of all men in our family. On the right is the document that I submitted to Yad Vashem in Israel in February of 2000. Mr. Demargue cross-referenced these two documents and found me, and eventually found the rest of the family. With my help, he was able to put together who was related to whom and realized that we were all one family who lived in Atlanta. As the time went on and my corresponding with him became more detailed, I knew that this was more than a small project. At first, I thought the three of us would make a short trip to France and check this out, but I started to share all this information with the rest of the family, and I was pleasantly surprised that everybody was interested and wanted to come. So in fact, 44 of us, representing 3 generations, went on this important and exciting trip to France. And so we took another journey to Vic. Only this time we went by plane, not by coal cars. Every family made their own flight arrangements, and the family came from Belgium, Israel, New York, Florida, Alabama, North Carolina, and of course Georgia. And we all met in the city of Vichy. The day finally arrived, we met Francois Demargue. It took so much work and effort on both our parts to organize this journey, and it was a touching moment to finally meet the gentleman that made all this possible. So who is this Francois? He was president of an organization assigned by the French government to do research on families that were hidden and deported from the Vichy area. He was the son of a Normandy farmer who sheltered downed Allied airmen who was working with the resistance to return them to England. Since then, Francois' personal connection to the war grew into his life's passion. He really did a lot of wonderful work trying to reunite families and all that. Our first family meeting in France was in the town of Vichy, and there you see the 7 surviving children: Fred, Lucy, Herb, Betty, Regina, Frida, and Suzy.
Well, finally my turn. Well, she already told you about our first family meeting in France. The next morning, we drove to Vic with the help of our French-speaking GPS. We arrived at 8:30 a.m. at the town square where the ceremonies of the day were to take place. More than 100 people were already gathered there from the village of Vic. We were warmly greeted by dignitaries and schoolmates who, to our amazement, recognized Lucy and Regine, and especially remembered our cousin Fred for the beautiful singing voice he had as a little boy. This day was such a big event from the town of Vic that we actually had media coverage, and the story appeared on the evening news. Also, the day was special to the French people as well because it was a national holiday, French Liberation Day, commemorating the liberation of France at the end of World War II. We walked about a mile as a group to the cemetery. It was an amazing sight to see. So many people of the village joining us. This is the mayor of Vic. There were many dignitaries from Vic, Vichy, and the Department of Allier assembled at the cemetery. The speeches made by them and our cousin Herbie before the unveiling of the plaque was extremely emotional and brought us all to tears. This was the dedication ceremony. Here is the unveiling of the memorial plaque with all 7 descendants of the Rosenfelder family and our friend Francois, who made it all possible.
Wow.
This is the culmination of all our work and planning, the anticipation of the day to actually see the names of our family members affixed to this memorial and realizing the void we all experience by having lost them at such a young age. This is the enlargement of the plaque that the French government commissioned to be placed at the community monument. This plaque commemorates the 5 Jewish refugees, our parents and their ages, who perished by deportation to Auschwitz in 1942.
Honoring the citizens of Vic. The people of Vic were extraordinarily kind and supportive. This is the first email I wrote when I started my correspondence with Francois. The people of Vic were extraordinarily kind and supportive. We survived because of the generosity of all the farmers living around La Gare, the train station. They provided us with food and lodging, but most of all, they took great risk, and you can't imagine the risk that they took in not revealing our presence. I consider these people true heroes. Remember, Vic is a small village. It literally took a village and the cooperation of all the inhabitants to not reveal our presence. And I cannot emphasize enough the risk these people took to ensure our survival. Their lives were on the line as much as ours. To show our gratitude, we dedicated this bench for the villagers to use. It was placed in the town square in front of the mayor's office. And the plaque reads as follows. Offered in gratitude to the inhabitants of Vic by the descendant of Hertz Dolman, David Rosenbaum, Solomon Rosenblatt, Belle and Martha Rosenblatt. Your heroism and your generosity ensured the survival of the descendants of our family during the Second World War, 1939 to 1945, and it was dedicated in 2010. After the presentation of the bench, the mayor of Vic said this. This is beautiful. During the turmoil of the 1940s, the community of Vic welcomed your family. 70 years later, she renews this welcome, writing a new page of history for us and for you. Signed by the mayor.
So, while we were back in Vic, we did a little sightseeing. This is a picture of La Gare, where we were hidden. The train station today. Today, meaning really 8 years ago, when all this happened, when we went back. There's been a paint job, and they have new shutters that have been added. And there is indoor plumbing and running water. And guess what? They had dish TV. We looked for our favorite apple tree. You remember Lucy was telling you about the apple tree that we loved. The one that produced apples so big that one apple would make a whole pot of applesauce. Actually, I don't even remember how big the pot was, but we remember those apples. Well, the tree did not survive 70 years, but my children always remember the story. Yes, Mom, we know about the apples. We love them. So, this is the house where our cousins Herb and Fred and their mother, Helly, hid until 1945. The house still looks the same. I mean, nothing changed in that one. The school where Lucy and I attended for a short while, as well as our cousins, Fred and Herbie. And we learned French, but Lucy and I weren't there very long. Now the building has been made into an apartment complex.
Later in the afternoon, we traveled back to Vichy to visit the only synagogue in the city. This is the photograph of the inside of the Orthodox synagogue. The final surprise of the day is that this synagogue had included the names of our loved family members on the plaque. As we slowly drove through the main street again, looking at the little houses that brought back so many memories, the most beautiful double rainbow appeared in the sky. We all stopped and looked up in amazement. It was as if we were bid farewell and wished a safe journey home.
So that's really the end, but I thought that it'd be nice for you to hear what it meant for one of the family members, me, along with all my cousins, to go back on this trip. 44 members traveled to France for this trip, and it represented 3 generations of families. It would have been 4 if my grandmother was able to attend at the time, but she wasn't strong enough to make it. But there were still 4 generations of family, and it really was very impactful to know that, you know, what had happened. Because up until this time, no one in the family really, even the 7 surviving children, really knew the complete story of what happened. And I will just tell you, as a growing up as a young child, you know, we really didn't talk about it. We really didn't talk about it. So we didn't know what the story was. And they were also very young as children. So they were like, we got on a train. That's what we heard. We got on a train and we ended up in this village and we slept in a barn. I mean, we didn't know the details of what happened. So, you know, it was really just bits and pieces that came out until this Francois pulled everything together for us with all the documents to kind of pull it and tell us the whole story. I think what really hit home for all of us when we were there, my cousins, my brothers, family, the whole weekend, was that, you know, 4 generations of family were there today because of miracles. And it really was true miracles and the generosity of strangers. You know, what were the miracles? The miracle was that the train from Belgium didn't stop at Vichy or Paris, like all the other trains. You know, 2 cities at that time, if you guys know the story, obviously, in Vichy and Paris, that was not where you wanted to go. And the train from Belgium was on their way to those cities. But something happened. It took a detour and ended up in the city of Vic. I mean, that's a true miracle. It was a miracle that out of 150 Belgian Jews, 17 members of my family were selected to go to this one city, all right? A miracle that the mayor of this city, the residents, and a pastor made difficult, risky decisions to do the right thing, to hide our family, and put them in an abandoned train station. A miracle that OSE, and this underground Jewish network were even in existence at the time and took my family to different places to protect and to hide them. And finally, a miracle that, you know, members all over France of the family were reunited together, all of them. I mean, it's absolutely a miracle. They were all over the place, and they were able to come together and travel to the States to start a new life. It was also for me a lesson in making judgments and making choices. You know, so often we hear comments concerning France, anti-Semitism, and we end up judging a whole country because of the acts of a few people. The story confirms that there are good non-Jewish people in France, good generous people like Francois, and good people like the townspeople in Vic. It also shows that everyone has a choice, and there is a choice about how one handles a seemingly unfathomable situation and how one handles directives that seem to give you no say in the matter. The town of Vic did the right thing, and because of that, my family is here, family, grandchildren, great-grandchildren, because of the acts of a few people in a city, and for that, we are so thankful that the city of Vic made the right choice. Thank you. They were so afraid that we were going to go over an hour. No, we're good. We're good. We're all good.
Thank you again for the presentation. It was just amazing, as you mentioned, how many stars, as it were, must have aligned to make this happen, to have this family here. We thank Hashem, thank God for aligning all those for us.